Hey everybody and welcome. Today we're going to be discussing the impact of poverty on child development and education. The goal for every student is an equal chance at success and a bright future. Today we're going to discuss a huge inhibitor to success for a large percentage of the world's children, and that's poverty. My name's Christian, and let's jump right in. So just a small overview, we're going to talk about the stages of development, cycle of poverty, the life of a student in a low-income home. We'll take a peek into their house, and then also the opportunities in education and other organizations that are supporting students in poverty. We'll be breaking these topics down as well as discussing strategies that we can implement to influence the amendment of the poverty issue in our world and the success for every child in education and their cognitive development. So this is a little deeper overview, everything that we're going to be breaking down as we travel through this. So what does poverty even look like? This is the thing that inhibits students in their education and in child development. It's a huge inhibitor. And so the dictionary definition is that poverty is a state in which a person or community maybe lacks the financial and essential resources for a minimum standard of living, and often it's far below that minimum standard, and that's extreme poverty. But I have three words for you. What does poverty look like? If you want to say them with me, it's observable, impactful, and changeable. So poverty reminds me of this saying we have in our school district, and it's JDLR, and that stands for just doesn't look right. And so poverty, you're going to see it just like you as a mandated reporter would see neglect or abuse on a child. You will see poverty as well. Maybe they don't come to school with the right supplies, or they come inappropriately dressed for school, or they're not even showing up to school. Poverty is going to be observable. And secondly, it's going to be impactful. If a student is living in poverty, it's going to not affect their education and development, but also reaches so many other factors of their life. And then thirdly, it is changeable. Poverty is changeable. It's also often built on the premonition that it's a cycle and it's unbreakable, but it is changeable. Education and the development of a child are extremely affected by the growing rate of poverty. In the United States, there's about 2,000 high schools that the ninth grade class will decrease by at least 40% by the time that they should be high school seniors. So a lot of times that has to do with poverty and other factors. All right, so let's look at stages of development. This has a huge influence on observing a student that might be affected by poverty. As a educator, you should be seeing the natural flow of development in a student. And according to Piaget, who we studied this semester in Psych 360, he discussed four stages of development, and someone has organized a nice table for us. So there are four stages: sensory motor, pre-operational, concrete operations, and formal operations. And according to him, these stages should flow naturally in a specific order. They are hierarchical, which means they should come subsequently after each other. And in relation to our topic, addressing poverty, as a student progresses, they have to have a steady environment, investing in their growth. Piaget really was a proponent of experiences in a student's life, of external influencers in a student's life that can allow these stages of development to progress. So students in poverty, they often experience gaps in these developments because of an unhealthy home environment during the developmental stages. Sometimes they're forced to take on responsibility that really they're not old enough to take on yet, or they're stunted in a stage of growth because they haven't had the outside influencers that can nurture that developmental stage. So developmental gaps in relation to poverty, how do these correlate? Learning gaps, if you're unfamiliar, they're the difference between what a student is expected to have learned by a certain grade level versus where they're actually at in development. One of the quotes that was from our book this semester talks about how students that are living in extreme poverty or stressful situations, living conditions, they have more difficulty functioning and progressing through through school and an education environment. So poverty plays a huge role in the life of a child and their education. And as we continue, we're about to talk about the cycle of poverty. It will affect their development, which eventually affects their opportunity. And we're going to look at that right now. So the cycle of poverty is, there's so many variations of what this looks like, but the basic foundation is that it is a cycle and it's difficult to break out of. Once it begins, it's difficult to walk away from. And so hunger and poor living conditions result in a lack of education. So maybe we don't have the access to transportation, or we don't have a schedule where we tell our kids to get up and go to school because we were working super late to get in extra hours or something. And so lack of education leads to lack of opportunity. And so there's maybe not secondary education or the resources that they can receive because of education. And so because of that, there's low income. So we don't have a job because we don't have a high school diploma, or and then the cycle continues. Because of low income, we have poor living conditions. So I believe here one of the greatest influential factors here is education. Once a healthy education is achieved, the students have more opportunity and resources, and then they can kind of cycle out of this poverty stream. So one of the documentaries that I watched was called The Eyes of a Child, and this was such a great documentary. But one of the things that I connected with it with also this prior research was that the families that were observed were always moving in multiple generations. And so it was usually grandparents with their children, and then their children would have children, and they always moved around with their family unit. And this just showed that poverty cycle continuing. They would, they wouldn't be able to pay their rent, so they would all gather up all their belongings and they'd move real quick. And so everyone was kind of living in the same routine and cycle. And then also there was unhealthy living conditions, which resulted in a student's stunted lack of development, according to Piaget. And also the cycle was continuing, that poverty cycle was continuing. So the students did not have a routine schedule where they would get woken up for school to go to school. They would just go when they wanted to. The parents were never there. And also it showed developmental gaps in a student's social development that Piaget talks about as well. The students were never influenced by outside influencers. They rarely had adults around them. The parents would go off and do what they were doing, and the students were left to take care of themselves. And so it was kind of just on their own, and that developmental growth was stunted. The second documentary that I watched was called Upper and Lower Class Divide, and this showed both ends of the spectrum, the lower class and then also the upper class families. And one family that was highlighted in this documentary was a Hispanic family, and their daughter was so excited to go to school. They lived in public housing, and she was so excited to go to school. She told her father that she wanted to go to college because she wanted to meet a bunch of celebrities, and she had all of these aspirations. And immediately her family told her that we cannot afford this. And so the educational opportunity was not there. But the father was like, we really want to try because we want our daughter to have that opportunity, but we don't know if we can do that. And so that cycle is trying to be broken. And a quote here, the Global Partnership for Education informed us that if 420 million people would receive a secondary education, then they would be lifted out of poverty. Wow, what an impact education has on poverty and vice versa. So if that educational opportunity is presented, as we discussed in the cycle of poverty, then there's a way that we can break out of that cycle. So some support for children in poverty. What are students receiving today? What do they have to support them at the moment? And so Save the Children is an organization that ministers to the needs of children, including education resources, health services, advocacy for girls in education, and emergency responses. They work directly with children that are not capable of affording education in this amazing resource. They are responding right now to COVID-19 and how they're going to make education accessible outside of home. And then secondly, there's educational resources. There's counseling in the school, free reduced lunch, tutoring hours, mandated reporters, that's you, and minimum health care, as well as transportation. So what we have right now is amazing, but how can we improve what we're doing, excuse me, to cater to the issue of poverty and its effect on education and child development? What can we do better? So Save the Children. Save the Children is a organization, like we talked about, that ministers to the needs of children through education. But something that I did not see them doing was training and equipping families for future decisions and obstacles. So they would minister in the moment, but there was never a future solution that was resolved. And so I think that they could connect families to education, or job training, or a financial management manager, that could help them with a solution rather than just a momentary help. And then also to maintain routine checks on families. It's so important to set goals like let's save $10 this week, or let's make sure to get our kids up for school every day this week. And providing that accountability for growth is important. And then for education, and the general public, let's train beyond the walls. Education and focus groups have become such safe houses for people, but it's more than our office hours in school buildings, because often students that are in poverty, they might not even be coming to school, and so they don't have access to those resources if they don't come to school. And so we could equip professionals with tools to act outside of the classroom, or teachers could be allotted a payday to carry out home visits to ensure that every child has adequate resources accessible to them outside of the classroom, and other things as well. And the general public could provide free community classes to inform those in poverty about financial management, or on-ramps to secondary education, career prep, etc. So many things that we can do beyond the walls of our resources. Thirdly is to address the teacher deficit, and this is so important. Without the hands to work, it's going to be impossible to attain this goal and breaking the cycle of poverty. So for us to see growth in the health of our learning environments, we have to address this deficit. We have to support raises for teacher income to make it for a competitive career. The public, please volunteer for positions within the school or during after-school programs. Advocate for higher education for teachers. And then mentor us as teacher professionals. We have to mentor upcoming educational professionals about poverty and the effects it has on our community, but also the child development and future. A final reflection that I have: with poverty rates estimated to rise dramatically in 2020, as you can see on the graph beside those words, the educational system and our organizations and the world, we have to become proactive in our efforts to counteract the effects that poverty has on education. We cannot be confined to the four walls that we work within, but we have to reach outwards with a consistent and unified effort to break that cycle. So in order to break it, everyone has to be involved. Our community should provide easy and accessible on-ramps to secondary education, or even getting those GEDs. And then also an advocacy for profession and education must be heightened. And then those educational resources and organizational resources that are provided should be made available after hours to our families, as well as those long-term solutions rather than those momentary answers. So poverty has a severe impact on the educational path and development rate of a child and the future of our world. So as a teacher, I want to participate in home visits and to connect families to education, and I also will advocate for educational careers. So I'd encourage you just to ask yourself these questions and apply them to this presentation. What does poverty look like in your community? Have I seen families, and what are the areas of my town that are affected by poverty? Do I know what to look for as a teacher professional? How can I advocate for education in my own life, my own career? And what role do I play right now in ending the cycle of poverty for students in my life? And what's something I could change to greater influence the breaking of the poverty cycle for my community? Here's some references. Here's some documentaries. I encourage you to watch these. Thanks for becoming informed. Now go advocate.